Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Energy and Resources Law Association webinar. I'm very happy for us to be again working with the Queensland Resources Council. We've had a good relationship, and the work that they are doing in Queensland is of real interest to our members, both those mostly involved in resources and also in the energy area as well. I just wanted to use this time just to remind you that we have the annual conference coming up in October, the first conference we've had in 2 years for obvious reasons, and I would encourage all of you to be looking at the program and to the possibility of attending. It's in Perth, and I know that's a little way away from some people on the East Coast, but I would encourage you to consider it seriously. It's a very topical program, convergence of energy, of resources and energy, powering future development, and it's an opportunity for us to look both at the importance and the integration of both areas of our real interest, both resources and energy. Please have a look at the program. It's on the website. There are opportunities for all of you to get something very worthwhile out of a very broad 2-day conference. There is also the opportunity for that great approach for ER law, and that is the opportunity for a social event, and there are several of them. The opening is on Wednesday evening in Perth. A great chance to take another step in developing your career by networking and meeting with people who you both know and will want to know. And there is also on Wednesday evening or late afternoon evening a satellite program organised specifically for young professionals, and that will be an opportunity for you to meet with and talk with more experienced lawyers who are planning and willing to share their experience of their career in energy and resources law. So I welcome you to today's event, and let me hand over to Nicole to do the real and more interesting part of this. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks very much, Gordon, and great to see so many people attending this event. And I would like to share my screen while I do the introductions. How are we going there? Does that share okay? Are we good with that? Yep. So welcome to today's event. The Queensland Resources Council is very pleased to be partnering with the Department of Resources, Queensland Department of Resources, on this event to introduce you to the Queensland Resource Industry Development Plan, and we'd like to welcome you all to the event today. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today, and we acknowledge that our First Nations people were the first people to make use of Queensland's minerals in their culture. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So welcome everybody today. As I said, it's a great opportunity for Queensland Resource Council to partner with Department of Resources and also ER Law Association, a great collaboration in our perspective. I'd like to introduce you to our two presenters today, the main game, which is Carly Sitch, who is the Executive Director of Reform at the Department of Resources. Carly has 15 years experience in the Queensland Government, focusing on strategic policy development and reform, most recently in the energy and resource policy space. Carly's experience also spans across the resource industry in community engagement as well as sustainable development. Carly has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a graduate certificate in Governance and Public Policy. So well-respected colleague. Thanks for joining us, Carly. I'd also like to introduce you to Lana Bartholomew, who's also Executive Director of Geo-Resource Policy at the Department of Resources. Lana is a specialist in regulatory and policy and has over 25 years experience in the public sector. She has a specialty in areas of water, mining, petroleum and gas. During this time, she has led programs across social justice, economic and natural resource portfolios. And Lana is currently working to implement the Queensland Resource Industry Development Plan, which we're talking about today. Lana holds a Bachelor of Laws from Queensland University of Technology, and welcome Lana to the group. So I just also like to acknowledge a couple of other people that are online who are from Queensland Resource Council, and that's Anna Wright, who I work very closely with, our manager of policy. She's a superstar in her own right as well. And Kylie Barron, who's also a director within Queensland Resource Council. And also a thank you to Jaya, who has organised and done a lot of the running around for this event as well. So thank you to all those other people who are online. I just wanted to quickly, I'll just see if I can change the screen here. I just wanted to quickly talk about the Queensland Resource Council before we move on to the more formal presentation. Queensland Resource Council is the peak industry body representing coal, metals, gas explorers, producers and suppliers across the resource sector in Queensland. We have a strategic focus on health and safety and energy, environment, industry, infrastructure and diversity and inclusion policy. We also have two other interesting sister organisations that are attached to the Queensland Resource Council, which you might have heard about, which is the Queensland Exploration Council and the Queensland Minerals and Energy Academy. So the Queensland Exploration Council is, we represent the explorers across Queensland. And as you would know, that exploration is really what creates the pipeline of new resource projects over into the long term. And so, you know, exploration is highly critical to the longevity and success of industry over the longer term. So we also have the Queensland Mining and Energy Academy, which is a fabulous organisation that really tries to attract young people to the mining and energy sector. They do some fabulous work in the schools and also universities, attracting the young and bright people into our sector. So currently there's a program called Shape Your Future, Innovate Our World. So I'd highly recommend you Google that one and have a look at that fantastic video that's on social media at the moment. It's called Shape Your Future, Innovate Our World, and it's a lovely video about trying to attract younger people into the resource sector in so many areas, from geology to engineering and environmental studies. I will probably leave it there and hand over to Carly and Lana to do the more formal presentation. And thanks very much, ladies. I'll leave it there and stop sharing.
Thanks, Nicole. I'll put our slides up in a sec. Oh, there we go. We'll try that.
There you go.
So hopefully you can all see that. Thanks for coming along today, everyone. As Nicole mentioned, Lana and I are here to talk about the Queensland Resources Industry Development Plan, which we also call QRIDP in government because, you know, we love an acronym and we can't stay away from one. That QR code there on the screen, as well as the URL, will get you to the website for the plan, which, you know, you can download a copy of the plan there and also unpack some of the 43 actions and some of the commentary that's in the plan that we're going to go through today. So we've got a bit of a quick preso about, talks about some of the drivers and why we started the plan, as well as key focus areas and some of our progress on actions. But I think what we really wanted to highlight today is that this is just the start of a conversation. The plan is for the 30 years, for the next 30 years for the Queensland resources sector. So it'll be a conversation we keep having with our stakeholders, including all of you around the virtual table. So we want to make sure that, you know, you're as engaged as possible as you can be in the actions and kind of can see the links for your work. So we're really happy to go through that with you in more detail today. And then there'll be a section for Q&As at the end. So I think you can put your questions in the chat and we'll go through them with Nicole later. So hopefully that works. So the QRIDP came about as a government election commitment. So it was released in June this year. That was developed with a really strong sense of co-design. So what was really key for us in resources in developing this plan is if we're looking at the next 30 years for the sector, obviously that's a really critical process, and we want to make sure as many stakeholders are involved in understanding what that looks like for Queensland as possible. So we undertook 2 rounds of stakeholder consultation, including submissions, and we had industry working groups as well as with our peak bodies. And Nicole mentioned Kylie Barron from the QRC on the line earlier, and Kylie was a really critical QRC member in helping us develop the plan and the actions that sit under that, as well as representatives from APR and AMEC, as well as First Nations groups, environmental groups, and people on the ground and resource communities. So we really wanted to make sure we heard from as many people as possible and understanding what actions would really kind of help the resource sector grow and transform into the future. And I think that transformation is really key, because we understand that there's a lot of factors that are putting pressure on the sector at the moment and also on our economy. So we wanted to make sure that we really focused in on that transformation piece, because we know the sector's no stranger to transformation, and obviously it's been actually a key characteristic of the industry while it has been evolving and shaping its contribution to the Queensland's economy. So that includes the minerals and metals, particularly gold, that were started when Queensland first started looking at mining in a serious way in the state. And then, we also have that great example of diversification in the CSG and LNG industry. It obviously went, from nothing into us being the key exporter, one of the key exporters globally in the CSG and LNG industry. And, there's no stranger to what we're facing today, because we're obviously finding that the world is changing again rapidly because of decarbonisation and what is increasingly expected from economies as we grow into decarbonising. So the resource industry is going to need to evolve and diversify once again. So this plan really sets up how we think that will happen for Queensland. It acknowledges what's happening in the global market for coal, which is obviously as areas decline and look at their reduced emissions, what the pockets of growth will be from areas like the Indo-Pacific, which is also particularly important for our met coal, and then also highlighting, what happens in terms of increasing renewable energy capabilities and what that will mean for gas. So also the plan talks about our coal and gas in that way, and also really highlights the opportunity that we have in the new economy mineral space, which we'll talk more about soon. So this slide here really talks about, it's kind of the plan on the page for the QRIDP. So it goes into a little bit of detail about what we're seeing are those emerging global trends. Again, no surprise to anyone, we mentioned decarbonisation before, obviously that's continuing to shape the global economy, and really those commodities that will be in demand increasingly into the future. Corporate social responsibility and decarbonisation we're also increasingly seeing as part of the ESG trend, which will be no stranger to a lot of you around the room. You're increasingly seeing it in terms of your business, and it's no stranger here in terms of how capital is moving, increasingly looking at ethical investment, what's happening with social license, and how can we make sure that companies are really focused on what they need to be in terms of governance. So that's going to increasingly influence investor and capital markets moving forward. We're also flagging there, access to resources. It's not the same as it once was. It's increasingly rarer and scarcer resources that people need to chase. So how do we make sure that we're thinking about the mining of the future? I mentioned the consumer base in the Indo-Pacific before, and obviously geopolitics are increasingly shaping where people are looking for resources and the supply chains. And emerging innovations, things like how do we make mining safer and more productive? And also digitally focused, obviously, with automation, there's a lot of focus on what that means for the future of mining. That orange bar there is about the key focus areas. So they're the chapters that we'll go through probably for the bulk of the presentation, and the actions that sit under there. So 6 key focus areas with 43 actions under each. But we really think that, if we work together, government and industry, working together on these actions, we can kind of achieve that bar down the bottom, which, you know, we really think that in 2050 we'll have global recognition for Queensland as somewhere that's a shining light for ESG, a really increasingly ethical place to invest, and people will want to put their money in Queensland because of that. You know, we'll be that diversified global supplier of new economy minerals, and it'll be making a greater contribution to Queensland's economy, and also really focused on those high quality and high wage careers, particularly for people in regional Queensland. So I'll hand over to Lana now to go through the first key focus area, which is about growing and diversifying the industry. So there you go.
Thanks, Carly. Global action to decarbonise ramps up. It's critical that Queensland prepares the economy, its industries and communities by expanding and diversifying the resources base, and particularly focusing on those areas where we can add value. We're working hard to attract investment and extend and strengthen supply chains to create a new wave of industrialisation in Queensland regions based on new economy minerals mining, processing, value adding and manufacturing. As you can see on the slide, there is a really strong focus across the 43 actions, with the first 17 or so really focusing on this theme. It is so important, and there's also a really strong flavour around new economy minerals. Today, rather than dance through every one of our 43 recommendations, we thought we would spend the balance of the slide deck talking through some of the actions to date. But of course, we're happy to take questions on anything on the list, and we'll do our best to answer. But we thought we'd focus in on a few things that are already underway. Importantly, while the plan was being developed, we weren't standing flat-footed in the department, and a number of initiatives had already kicked off during the period where we were consulting and fine-tuning our plan prior to the release in July. So we are well positioned to deliver on what is a significant challenge, but I just wanted to stress to this group particularly, as we work moving forward, it's really important that we can collaborate productively with industry and stakeholders and their representatives. So I'd invite you all to have a role to play, because we will be actively looking for input. We know that we can't sit here in isolation within the department and develop reform. We want pragmatic solutions to these challenges that the sector faces. So I'd really invite you to engage with us. So the first one we wanted to talk about was in the plan, $22.5 million has been allocated for Queensland's Collaborative Exploration Initiative. This is such an important initiative because it helps drive new discovery. We know that if we are to have a successful new economy minerals, if new economy minerals is going to develop as an industry in Queensland, we really need to be driving exploration. It's been a very long time since there have been significant new discoveries of new resources, but we know that we have potential in Queensland and that the world is hungry and that there is appetite there. The Collaborative Exploration Program is an initiative that seeks to encourage exploration, particularly in those frontier and greenfields areas where it is so very expensive to conduct activities. We're hoping that it will support innovative exploration techniques, including things like machine learning, and that we can promote and develop the new economy minerals. Part of the framework provides for the IP from those discoveries to be shared openly. And this open file data is one of the things that we think will be a significant lever to success as those explorers move forward. The first round of expanded funding will commence in 23-24. This is part of an ongoing program that the department's had in play for a long time. And if you have an interest and you're looking to dig into it deeper, please reach out and we'll put you in contact with the Geological Survey of Queensland, who's administering this project. We're also have been working to support explorers, particularly for new economy minerals, by implementing or seeking to implement some legislative reforms to allow us to defer the first year of rent for mining leases, which are our version of production leases here in Queensland. I'm really pleased to say that we're very hopeful that we'll be introducing amendments shortly, and particularly wanting to acknowledge the members of the QRC who've recently been working with us on fine-tuning those amendments. Those amendments we are hoping will be passed by the end of this year, which means we'll be able to deliver this real reform to explorers very quickly. The intent of the rent deferral will be that it will only apply to new mining leases who are mining for specified new economy minerals. A regulation will define those, what is a new economy mineral clearly, and the intention is that those proponents who are seeking to access the deferral will be asked to demonstrate that they're redirecting those dollars into startup and development costs. It is a true rent deferral. It's not a rent holiday, so to speak. We will be asking for that rent amount to be repaid, but in years 4 to 8 of the mining lease. So we're really hopeful that this will be one of those small initiatives that government can do that can help kickstart companies moving forward into production during that very capital intensive first period of first year on lease. We've also been working for the past 2 years or so on a Bowen Basin concept study. This work was completed late last year, and we've been looking at how or what opportunities there might be to unlock the significant gas resource potential of the North Bowen Basin. I'm sure no one here would have missed the conversations that have been going on, particularly over the last 6 months or so, about the possibilities of a shortage of supply in the gas market, particularly for domestic consumers. We know that in Queensland we've been blessed with the world-class Surat Basin, but those resources are maturing and we need to have an eye to the future. Our first stage concept study confirmed the department and industry's suspicions around the Bowen Basin that yes, it was well placed to meet future supply, however identified that there are a number of impediments. Most importantly, the basin is isolated. It's not connected to the East Coast market. It services a small demand point in Townsville in North Queensland. So to move forward, we've engaged a second project where we have employed KPMG and a consortium including GHD and NSAI and ASL Allen to work with us to test the market. So we've had a structured market engagement out and about over the last 6 to 8 weeks where they've been interviewing everyone involved in the possibility of the Bowen Basin, everyone from explorers to gas producers to pipeliners to manufacturers, as well as importantly investors. And our goal is to try and work through what is the opportunity for government in trying to support private sector investment to unlock the resources. We're looking to wrap the project up in the next couple of weeks with a view to the final report landing for government consideration by the end of the year. I'd certainly encourage anyone who has an interest who may wish to participate. The door's still open. If you do have a desire, please reach out to me directly and we can incorporate you in the process that's at play.
So the next focus area is about strengthening our ESG credentials and protecting the environment. And, you know, again, I don't think anyone is a stranger to ESG and its increasing relevance in day-to-day business, particularly in the resources sector. And we heard a lot about ESG during consultation, so we really wanted to reflect that in the final report. And, you know, I think actions here are really focused on, we're not exactly sure the best way for government to play in this space, because we're really conscious that, you know, a lot of what is happening in the ESG space will be driven internationally. So we don't want to necessarily put anything rigidly in place in Queensland that then impacts our ability to innovate and to move with what is happening on that international stage. But we did hold a separate ESG workshop in April this year to really try and unpack that more with industry, academics, community and First Nations groups to really kind of go, okay, well, if we're thinking ESG and we're seeing its importance increasingly, what does that actually mean for Queensland? And how do we really, you know, kind of highlight our ESG credentials and really show the world that Queensland's a great place to invest because of it. So our actions that we landed on for final were to continue this conversation effectively through an advisory panel and really work out how industry and government can work together to show that ESG leadership in this space and really highlight our reputation as a trusted and transparent resources jurisdiction, and a great place to invest. So that's what 19 and 20 are about there. And I also just wanted to highlight number 22, which I think you know, a lot of you would be interested in, which really is about the Queensland Government's intention to develop a decarbonisation plan policy for the sector. Which is about understanding, you know, Queensland Government's obviously got targets to net zero by 2050. You know, we have our existing emissions reduction targets and our renewable energy targets. So that's really about understanding how we're all pulling together in that direction in the sector as well. Obviously, really conscious that a lot of companies also have net zero targets. So trying to understand what does that look like for each company. You know, it's really focused in on scope 1 and 2, and there'll be further information coming out about that plan and what the thinking is from our colleagues from the Department of Environment and Science, likely later in the year. But I also did want to flag it. Obviously, we're really conscious that the Commonwealth Government's put out a lot of information about how they're seeing the safeguard mechanism work into the future, and just to let you all know that we're really conscious of that, and we've been working with the feds closely on understanding what that could look like, and making sure that anything that happens from a Queensland perspective complements that rather than works against it. So you should see some more information later in the year on that one.
Coexistence is so very important to the success of the resources industry. We are really wanting to see, from a departmental perspective, the industry building solid relationships with the hosting communities, Indigenous people, as well as those who might be the owners of the land within which we're giving them the authority to operate on. So for us, there is a really important theme in QRIDP that focuses sharply on coexistence. For those of you who aren't from Queensland, we do have a thriving onshore coal seam gas industry that has emerged over the last 10 to 12 years from nothing to a really large industry, particularly centred around the rural communities around Roma and Dalby in southwest Queensland. Those areas are prime grazing land, also prime agricultural cropping land, and are intensively cropped and developed. We had a lot of learnings in Queensland early on with the emergence of CSG, and we've matured a framework over time that I think has allowed, but in the most part, companies to coexist successfully. But there have been learnings along the way. There's also been flashpoints. We've had a recent flashpoint in the Surat with the expansion of a very large gas project onto intensively irrigated cropping land. And we're very focused on working to improve that. But what we know is that we developed some frameworks on the fly, piece by piece, and we've created a system that perhaps is a little difficult to navigate, particularly for landholders in the community. And we're working hard to work on the very congested space that reflects our coexistence institutions that include the Land Court of Queensland, the Land Access Ombudsman, the Gasfields Commission, and the Office of Underground Water Impact Assessment. We're working hard to look at developing a new framework that is clearer for the community and allows them to access the services that they need to be able to support them, because we do appreciate that sometimes landholders don't come from the same negotiating position as companies, and it's important that we have the structures in place to provide the support both for industry and landholders particularly. So we've been working on a discussion paper that we're hopeful will be released by the end of this year. The first part of the discussion paper will look at those land access institutions, and we're very keen to get feedback because we did receive a lot of feedback during QRIDP, but we really wanted to have people's focus in on the institutions and get some further feedback. So we'll be releasing a paper later this year. The paper will also importantly propose new land access principles that will apply to both landholders, but also to resources companies. And those principles will be locked into the Land Access Code. We're hopeful that that will be completed by the end of this year following consultation. But importantly, that benchmark will hopefully set really clear expectations from both sides of the fence and will help to de-escalate some of the tensions that exist in the community. So we're hopeful, as I said, that we will get the paper out shortly, and we'd really invite certainly as much feedback as we can possibly get, particularly from those who may not be landholders and may not be resource companies. So we've got an interest particularly in getting feedback from those people who represent landholders and companies as part of the process as well. So look out for that one.
And picking up on that theme, or continuing it through rather, is about our next focus area, which is about ensuring strong and genuine First Nations partnerships. It's obviously really related to coexistence and sustainable development in communities, but we wanted to particularly highlight the integral and unique role that First Nations groups have in the resources sector as, you know, projects happen on country, and you know, that need to entrust traditional owners with a role in the resources sector, as well as ensuring that ownership from traditional owners throughout a mine's life cycle. So the actions in this area are really focused on some of the work that the government's already doing to support First Nations reconciliation. We've got an existing review of Cultural Heritage Act that I'm sure many of you are aware about, and also highlighting the work that we're doing on the path to treaty, but also recognising as part of this focus area that we know that there are some pockets of industry that have really strong relationships with their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, but we recognise that we think that there can be some further work done. Obviously, a lot of what was brought up during consultation was, you know, some of the issues around Juukan Gorge and the like. So we wanted to make sure that we're really implementing that robust framework so things like that don't happen again. You know, going beyond Indigenous land use agreements and really looking at true reconciliation opportunities and true partnership in communities, that things that go beyond the footy jerseys and the like. So how are we looking at things like equity partnerships with traditional owners, and really making sure that it's jobs and employment and economic development at every stage of the life cycle, including in rehab and post-mining use. The next focus area there is about a safe and resilient future workforce. So obviously, you know, safety is paramount, and we would never, that's not a contestable thing in the resources industry in Queensland. We maintain that people who go to work need to come home safely at the end of the day. And so really about how do we make sure that safety is still so fundamental in the workforce, but also that we're attracting the right future workforce, and looking at how do we make sure that that workforce is resilient and really focused on the future. I think every time we went out and spoke to anybody in industry, they were bringing up workforce issues. Probably not surprisingly, I think it's an issue that is faced by every sector, particularly at the moment in terms of the skill shortage that we're facing, but particularly seeing it in the resources sector. And I know a lot of you will know about vacancies and how we can't fill them today. So how are we making sure that we're really looking at the existing workforce, making sure that they've got the right skills to move forward, as well as attracting the right people to make sure that we've got that sustainable workforce of the future. So there's actions in here about, you know, the existing Queensland Future Skills Partnership, and providing some additional funding to that program to make sure that it can kind of help with those micro credentials and the like, as well as developing a resource industry workforce plan. So some of you may be aware that the Queensland has just put out an umbrella Queensland workforce strategy, and one of the actions flagged in that is also the same thing about developing what the workforce plan is for the resources industry. So our colleagues at the Department of Employment and Skills will be working on that increasingly, and you'll see some work come out about that, but really trying to understand what those actions that industry and government can work together to make sure we have the workforce of the future.
Rigorous and contemporary regulation has always been vital to instil community confidence. Increasingly, it's also a solid foundation on which industry can build ESG credentials, and items 33, or action items 33 to 40, reflect the government's commitment to working across agencies. Importantly, this plan is a plan that's a whole of government plan. We have a number of ministers who have signed on their departments to deliver action items in the reform. And we have a really strong theme to work on reducing red and green tape to try and assist industry. We also know that red tape can be a barrier to projects moving forward, and that we have a role to play. I won't deep dive into the particular actions. We're happy to take questions, but I'm also very cognizant of time, and I wanted to make sure that you have the opportunity for Q&A.
Yeah, we've got a couple here, but we can.
Okay. stop sharing. Do you want to go? We'll do land release just quickly. Just quickly, we are also working on land release. As we've said a couple of times, exploration is one of those key aspects to ensuring that we have an ongoing, sustainable, thriving resources sector here in Queensland. We have a land release process here in Queensland that has been underway for about the last 5 or 6 years in its current iteration. Whilst we've been doing incremental improvements on that process, we know that there are still opportunities to do better, and we'll also be coming out with a paper seeking feedback towards the end of this year with a view to an improved land release program rolling out into next year. And so that will hopefully come out shortly as well. The final one, I think, on our list today is we wanted to flag with you that we in Queensland have a very, very complex process for objections and in Queensland that apply to mining leases and environmental authorities. We know that, and we hear from industry frequently and often, that it creates great uncertainty, and many of those approval processes that played out in the media in recent years and months highlight that there can be seemingly a never-ending loophole that just keeps being rolled through, that creates an endless cycle of appeals and reviews. It's a complex piece of work, and we're also very keen to ensure that the work is well received by government. Because of the complexity and the fact that there are very, very different views from different stakeholders, particularly those outside of the sector. We've commissioned the Queensland Law Reform Commission to do this piece of work. We're currently finalising terms of reference, which we're expecting to settle this year, with the Law Reform Commission commencing the work in early 23. It will be a highly consultative process, but it will take time. And we're expecting that that report will be provided and finalised for government in early 2025.
So that was the kind of the highlights of what we wanted to go through today from the 43 actions. Just a plug again for the website down the bottom. So please check it out. And yeah, if you've got any questions, please let us know. And I hope that that stopped sharing and then we can see everyone again. There you are.
Thanks so much, Carly and Lana. That was a great presentation. We'll just take some questions now. If you'd like to put the questions into the chat, that might be helpful, or sing out if you can. The chat's probably the easiest methodology. Well, I think we've got a couple of questions there now.
So I'm happy to answer the question in regard to the Queensland Law Reform Commission package of work. The question relates to whether or not that process will respond to the Productivity Commission's review of the resources sector. The answer is the terms of reference are fairly broad-natured, and there is the Law Reform Commission will have scope to consider whatever it is that comes before them. So the answer, in short, is yes. We're excited about the package of work. Once the terms of reference are signed off, we do intend to release those to stakeholders and to publish them on the QRIDIP website. As I said, we're hopeful that those terms of reference will be signed off by the Attorney General and accepted by the QLRC towards the end of this year. So we'll certainly keep the this group updated as that progresses.
Thanks, Lana, that's good. And the next question is about small-scale mining reforms. Do you guys have an update on small-scale mining? QRC doesn't do much in this space.
I'm happy to have a crack at that one.
Thanks, Lana.
One of the teams in my group is working on small-scale mining reform. When the draft QRIDIP plan came out, we did impose a moratorium on new mining claims. Mining claims in Queensland pose some challenges. Some of those challenges relate to the types of activities that are conducted on mining claims. Mining claims are meant to be for the purposes of very small scale mining, and they allow people to gain access to a small area for a relatively short period of time. It allows them to provide for temporary dwellings, but what we've seen, particularly in the gemfields areas west of Emerald in central Queensland, is that many people are turning those to very permanent dwellings, which is creating a range of other issues out there in the gemfields. So we're keen to work with government and industry to think about how can we develop a framework that is more fit for purpose, that allows for those mining activities to occur, but also allows for people to be dwelling on land and residing on land in a way that is lawful. So we are working on a paper. I feel like I've said we're working on a lot of papers so far in the last hour, but we are working on papers and have been working closely with local councils in the region to work out a pathway forward where we can look to amend the framework. We are of a view that we'll be coming out with a paper by the end of this year, probably more like November than September and October, but we are hopeful we'll get a paper out and we'll be able to have a more detailed conversation around our thinking at that point.
That's great. Thanks, Lana. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think that might signal the sort of the closure of the questions, I think. I can't see any more there. Thank you so much, Carly and Lana, for your expertise and ongoing collaboration with QRC and also ER Law Association. I think these types of collaboration are really important to industry. They're really important to the community because we always land better solutions when we think together on these complex and difficult policy issues. So thank you very much for that. It's fabulous. To all the people online, thank you very much for coming along today. And if you want to become a member, just a last plug of QRC, Queensland Resources Council, we do take service members. We have a number of law agencies involved in QRC, so don't hesitate to sign up and be part of it, and then you'll get ongoing information about the QRIDP because we, as I said, we work very closely with Lana and Carly on this issue. So yeah, any further comments, Lana and Carly?
No, just to say thanks so much for paying attention and listening. And yeah, as Lana's flagged a couple of times, you know, we're really keen to kind of stay involved and hear what everyone's got to say as we implement. So please keep in touch, and any questions, please send them through.
Right.
The website has kind of an ability to find out more information about specific actions as well. If you'd like to keep track of how we're going with specific actions or things like that, you can stay up to date that way as well.
Great. And Gordon, would you like to close up finally from the ER Law Association team?
Thanks very much. Thanks to all of you for a great presentation and a very interesting pair of deliveries. I'd also like to thank everybody for being part of this. It's an important area. We see it as a great way for ER Law to provide a great level of service as well in another area to its members. So thank you all for being part of it. And I'll put a final plug in for our conference. And if there are any QRC members who are online today and are interested in attending the conference, please get in touch with us. We'll look at doing a deal for you as well. So apart from adding the steak knives to the offer, I'll want to thank you all very much, particularly Nicole for promoting this and for leading the discussion today. I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Gordon. Thanks, ladies.